Hey guys, welcome to Tyson's Fitness Tips Podcast. If you want to lose weight, increase your energy, improve your health and fitness, and look your best, then you have come to the right place. My name is Tyson Brown. I'm a personal trainer, and my job is to help you transform your body by sharing with you the most up-to-date information on health and fitness. I'm going to distill it all down for you into bite-sized actionable steps that you can take immediately to see results quickly. Now, every Tuesday and Thursday, you can expect a brand new episode, which will be a mixture of interviews with top experts from around the world in the fitness space, and as well as solo episodes from myself, sharing with you exactly what action steps you need to take to transform your health, your body, and your life. Also, don't forget to listen all the way to the end of the show, because in the middle, I'm going to share with you a time-saving tip, and it might just be a game changer. I know you're short on time, and this one can save you a lot of time and a lot of energy. So, let's get into the show. What is going on, guys? It is Tyson Brown here, and welcome to another episode of Tyson's Fitness Tips Podcast. Today is episode 101. Yes, we've made it past the 100 podcast mark, and now I've decided to bring on a really special guest because he is actually my coach and my mentor. So I thought, you know what? Let's bring him on, let's bust some myths, and let's have some fun today. So I want to welcome to the show Tony Boutagy. Tony, thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Great to be here with you, Tyson.
Awesome. So Tony, for the people who don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first, you know, what you do, how you kind of got started in the fitness industry, just so we can get some background on yourself.
Sure thing. Well, I've been in the industry for over 2 decades now, and I first started in the field working as a personal trainer to pay my way through a sports science degree, and never thinking I would end up in sports science or exercise. I thought I'd be a musician, but I fell in love with anatomy and physiology pretty early on. And so dumped music and stayed working as a personal trainer and finished an undergrad degree in sports science. And then I went on and did doctoral work in sports science. And so I've had, over my career, a bit of a foot in the camp of science and university and research, and I've had a bigger foot in the camp of personal training. So I work mainly in the day. My day-to-day job is primarily training programs for a variety of different needs. And in the afternoon, I do research and reading and lecturing and so forth. So it's a bit of a mixture, which leads to a less boring life.
Very, very cool. So being in the industry for so long, you've obviously seen trends and things come past. You might have been caught up in trends yourself. You know, like all those things, you've experienced the last 20 years of being in the health and fitness industry. So you've seen the highs, you've seen the lows, and yourself being in the science, you've seen what works and what doesn't work. That's right?
I would say so, yeah.
Very cool. And that's actually why I wanted to bring you on today, because I haven't really brought anyone who reads the science and who does the lectures and, you know, really gets deep and nitty-gritty. A lot of us personal trainers, we don't go that deep into it. So it's actually, I really wanted to bring you on so we can bust some myths that are out there, because you hear a lot of people saying, you know, this diet's the best, or you hear people saying you need to eat this many ways or train this certain type of way, but you go and do the research and you see what works and use it practically in your own training with clients, and like clearly you're just going back and forth to see what's new, what's coming out, and what's trending at the moment.
Sure. Well, I can give you so many examples of things that we thought were trendy and would work, and we tried them. And I think when you do work with the motivated public, you learn pretty quickly that if something doesn't work, it doesn't work pretty quickly, and you dump that kind of philosophy and you eat humble pie. And I've eaten a lot of humble pie over the years of really thinking something would work and was the next best thing, and only to realize that it didn't deliver what we thought it was going to deliver, and we changed our approach. So I think I've certainly been hit with a great dose of humility over the years of many failed approaches.
Absolutely. And just a quick question, Tony, how do you go, like, the science shows you that one thing either works or it doesn't work. And if it proves that it doesn't work, well, then clearly it doesn't work. But how can we think about, how do I explain this? Dogma, you know, like we might believe in something so much, but it's just been proven it does not work. How can we slowly transition out of that, or convince ourselves, like that's the science and that's what it is, because a lot of people seem to argue with certain things of science even though it's proven that it doesn't work, or in this case it does work, depending on what it is. How do you educate your clients on that?
Well, essentially, there's two answers to that. And the second one is the easiest to answer. If it's a diet or an exercise regime or even a supplement, that if a client believes so fervently that it really is doing them good, then if it really isn't doing them harm, then I wouldn't really, I'd pick my battles. And just because I don't think that the science stacks up or it's doing what they think that it is doing, if they're getting benefit and there's no harm to their health or longevity or so forth, I probably wouldn't pick my battle there. I don't have to be right for the sake of being right if they have a strong belief in that. Secondly, is what would essentially happen if research suggests Y, but they believe X. It could be that research hasn't answered all of the questions. And this is certainly true in the world of nutrition and exercise. That nutrition and exercise studies, they can't answer all of the questions, or it might be on a different population group. It could be such that the studies that suggest opposite to what the client is feeling could be because they did it on a different gender, a different age group, they trained differently, the intensity was different. So it comes down to, did the research really address this? There's so many unknowns and variables that go into nutrition and exercise that if a client really did believe something, I might not tamper with it. Unless there was really clear-cut research, and I think that's what you're alluding to, and that could be something carbohydrate versus dietary fats versus calories in the diet, something that we know really clearly from research that for the vast majority of people, that exchanging calories coming from carbohydrate or fat really don't make a great deal of difference to body composition as long as protein is held constant. However, something that you're not addressing in that research is how people respond to those different macronutrients. And by saying that, clients might have an overeating relationship with carbohydrate and not from fat, which means that it doesn't really matter what the science says. If that client says, I have one slice of sourdough and then I'm going to eat the whole thing, if that's a relationship that person has with bread or carbohydrate, then it might be a good idea to restrict the carbohydrate. So you've got to read science and see who it was done on, and then you have to make that application to the real world. And that's not a straightforward jump most of the time.
I guess at the end of the day, we've always got to be open to things that are coming out too. Like, never take everything and stay on that one path the whole time. You've always got to be open to try new things, or to see what's the word called? Like, when things back you up, and when things don't back you up, and make your own decision at the end of the day.
Well, ultimately, yeah, you need to be informed by scientific understanding on health and nutrition and exercise. But ultimately, you need to be looking and trialing things for yourself and working out, hey, does this actually work for me or not? You don't really need science. If you find that a diet is overall healthyful, but you do really well when you up your protein and fat and you reduce your starchy carbohydrates. Well, if you do great on that, then happy days, stick to that. And if it's vice versa, you do really well on grains and legumes and fruits and so forth, and your blood profiles are great and you have great energy, then that's why you need to trial and error for yourself. So there is a lot of reading the science and understanding it, but there's a lot to say for self-experimentation that is scientifically informed, and to see what works best for you. And then the hard part, if you're a trainer or a dietitian, is, just because it worked for me, will it work for the clients? And that's why you need to have a really strong grounding in the science to understand these concepts.
Okay. And I think that's a big takeaway point there, just for you guys listening. For the first thing is, like Tony said, you've got to see what works for you. So you can't just say, there's no one diet that's going to determine whether you are going to completely lose all your weight or whether you can't. Like, I could say a high-fat, low-carb diet could work for you, but if it doesn't, if high-fat messes up with your blood profile and you seem to consume too much fat, well, then obviously that's not going to be the best thing for you. So always be willing and open to trying new different types of things, because there's no one end-all, be-all, especially when you might not suit that diet.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And so when we come to that, Tony, I kind of want to think about like a trend at the moment is the ketogenesis diet, right? I've had a lot of clients ask me, I've had a lot of people message me, and people saying they're trying it, but now like all of a sudden, we've gone from fats being bad, and now we're saying carbohydrates are completely bad. But is that the truth? Like, are carbohydrates actually bad for us?
Well, there's two answers to that question, and they're related. And the first is one might choose a diet that puts you into ketosis, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a viewpoint that carbohydrates are bad. It could be simply that for therapeutic reasons or for weight loss reasons, one finds entering ketosis greater clarity of mind and energy levels. So that's a dietary choice that somebody makes without a viewpoint whether carbohydrates are good or bad. The second point, and many people in the public might believe this, is because carbohydrates release the hormone insulin, and insulin is bad, therefore we should cut down carbohydrates as much as feasibly possible, typically under 50 grams a day. And within a few days, the body starts producing an alternative substrate, which are ketone bodies. And I think most people, well, the majority position would argue against that second view, and that is you have therapeutic benefits of going into ketosis, but the idea that insulin is bad and only carbohydrates release them, therefore the preferred metabolic state for us to be in for health and weight loss and body composition is ketosis. I think that's a mistaken viewpoint of our current understanding of ketogenesis and going into ketosis.
Right. Okay. And so in saying that, is there anything special about the keto diet that, is there anything special about it, or is it just another diet where if it works for some people, it's going to work, but at the end of the day, all diets, as long as the calories are reduced, people are going to be able to lose weight?
Yeah, it depends on your outcome, and this is how we answer any question. If you want to eat a low carb, high fat diet and enter ketosis, what is your reason for doing that? And if you adopt a vegan, plant-based diet, what is your reason for doing that? And most people, it would come down to improved body composition. It can be improved mental clarity and energy levels. And it could be improved physical performance if you're an endurance athlete, for example. So there's lots of reasons why people adopt a nutritional lifestyle. And I say lifestyle because to do something like this, it really is a radical change to how people live and what you eat when you go out and so forth. And with ketosis, it's not straightforward because it's not like ketosis is new. I heard a professor in a different field talking about ketosis recently, and it wasn't their area of expertise. And they basically said, oh, well, ketosis is just Atkins repackaged, and I've seen it repackaged several times in my life. Now, that's a gross misunderstanding and oversimplification of a very complex topic. Studies on ketosis have been performed for at least 100 years and is a well-accepted therapeutic intervention for disease states like drug-resistant epilepsy, drug-resistant seizures, and certain types of brain cancers. We're discovering more and more about this alternative metabolic state each day. And it's really up to us to stay in touch with this literature rather than making a really inaccurate statement. It's just Atkins repackaged. Most people in our industry are interested in it from a weight loss perspective. In other words, your body is burning fat, which means I must be losing fat. And that's actually a misunderstanding of the physiological process. Just because your body is using the substrate of fat as a fuel source doesn't mean that you're actually losing body fat. They can be the same things, but they actually aren't the same thing. To be in a state where one is losing body fat, one has to be in a state of negative energy balance for at least several days to several months. And if you switch to ketone bodies for your metabolism, it just simply means that the body has not been presented with enough carbohydrate to run on. So within several days, the body reassembles your dietary fat in the liver to produce ketone bodies that essentially act, quote unquote, as carbohydrates. So it passes the blood-brain barrier. And these ketone bodies derived from fat can serve as a substrate for metabolism. And that is absolutely remarkable that the human body can retool substrates and retool muscle and retool brain to run on these different metabolic substrates. So that's fascinating. But it's a very separate question to say, well, if I am running on ketones, then I must be burning fat, which means I must be losing weight. Those two are very separate things. So you can be in ketosis. You can be running 2 millimolars of ketone bodies, but you can be gaining weight because your body is in a surplus of energy. So the only benefit for if you're going to adopt this strict lifestyle, to my mind, is twofold. One, it would be for people who have, for whatever reason, genetic reasons or lifestyle reasons, they have abnormal insulin response, both at fasting levels or an abnormal insulin response after a meal. And we know that has a sequelae of other health problems. And the second would be for those people who don't have an off button when they do eat dietary carbohydrates. So the example I gave before, you have one slice of sourdough and then 10 minutes later, the whole loaf is gone. So for those folk, it's really well understood that when they enter ketosis, their appetite drops and they reach satiety much easier and they just don't feel like eating. And I think that's really useful for those folk who are chronically hungry, always looking for food, always thinking about food. So for my mind, reading the literature, there would be two likely candidates for those people who would think about adopting a low-carb, high-fat or ketosis diet. But it's not as a superior way when matched for calories for fat loss.
Okay, good to know. And so, like you said, at the end of the day, what is going to determine whether you lose body fat or not is whether you're in a calorie deficit for a long period of time, a week, a month, several months, to make sure you're actually losing body fat. You cannot be consuming more calories than you burn during the day.
Oh, absolutely. And there's numerous examples of really famous personalities in the ketosis and fasting world there's one in particular who is morbidly obese, but in ketosis for long periods of time. It's just simply because the human body, in his case, has been provided with far more energy than his body is actually burning. And I know it's not sexy, but researchers spent a lot of time trying to identify these mechanisms. And they cost tens of millions of dollars to perform this tightly controlled research, which exchanged calorie for calorie, carbohydrate and fats. And they keep people in metabolic wards, and they have very little contact with the outside world, and these things have been measured quite precisely. So I don't think that's really up for debate anymore. I think that's really well understood, really well accepted, that when you control for protein, that your calories derived from carbohydrate-based foods or fat-based foods, as long as it pushes you into a caloric deficit, then weight loss will ensure. And that then is practical advice that you take to the real world, and that is once you again account for protein, you have to eat something. So will that be fat-based choices, avocados, nuts, seeds, fatty fish, and so forth? Or will it be more plant-based, fiber-based, and legumes and whole grains and whole wheats and so forth? That's a decision that really only the client can make. But that's a really great, usable bit of advice for our clientele, and that is once you add a protein source at breakfast, lunch, dinner, then the rest of your calories can be derived from healthy, full choices, whatever suits your philosophy and whatever fills you up and your religious beliefs and all of those kinds of questions. I think that's really a great piece of usable advice for dietitians and trainers.
It's Tyson's time-saving tip. Today, we're going to be talking about getting more done with your shopping in a shorter amount of time. Now, one thing that I've actually found when it comes to food shopping, or it just comes to getting to the grocery store in general, you can take a fair while to get stuff done, you know? You end up going down there, you try and find a spot, you get into the supermarket, you dawdle around, you take your time. When you get back home, then you got to meal prep. And before you know it, you've wasted like 2 or 3 hours and you haven't really got much done. So what I like to do is actually set deadlines for yourself. So let's say on a Sunday, you know you need to do meal prep, right? Well then, say everything needs to be done by 9 a.m. That way you have the rest of your day to yourself. And so when you have that deadline in there, You're up early, you're going to the shops, you're getting it done, you're getting back home, and then you're going to be done by 9 o'clock. Because when you have a deadline, we like to respond to that. Imagine your boss giving you a deadline. Well, you know you've got to achieve that, right? And so you start picking up the pace a little bit. It's the same as when you were in high school. You used to muck around with your assignments and you would take your time, but when that deadline came closer and closer, all of a sudden you could get it done. So when you set yourself a deadline and saying, I'm only going to be 30 minutes in the shop, I'm going to be doing meal prep until 9 a.m. and then I've got the rest of the day free, you're going to be much, much more on point to get that deadline done. And you're going to find yourself that you get things done a lot quicker. So instead of spending hours doing food shopping, meal prep, putting it away, if you start to do it quicker and quicker because you've got that deadline, you've got more of the day free, which is awesome. So set yourself a specific deadline. That can even be for the gym too. You're like, you know what? I need to be in by half an hour. I've got 30 minutes to go as hard as I can. You set that deadline, you put the timer on, and you go, go, go. And one thing to keep that deadline on track, to make sure you're on track, reward yourself after. If you're going to do meal prep by 9 a.m., say, I'm going to do meal prep by 9 a.m., and then I'm going to treat myself to a massage, or something that's going to incentivize you to push it hard. That is your time-saving tip for the day. Now let's get back into the episode. Okay, cool. So finding out what's going to work for myself, like anybody, what's going to make me more satiated, make me feel better, what's going to make me have more mental clarity, but still always start with that protein source first, and then decide where I want to get my calories from, whether it be healthy fats or whether it be carbohydrate sources, depending on what fills me up, what makes me feel good. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right on. That's right on. So if a client is having 2 meals a day because they're trying to lose weight, then we'll work out X amount of protein to make sure that their skeletal muscle is protected. So we know that protein all by itself has a special protective role for muscle. Otherwise, you tend to metabolize a bit of muscle along with fat when you are in energy deficit. But also protein has been demonstrated to be the most filling of all the macronutrients. So compared for equal calories amongst carbohydrates, fats, and protein, fat will tend to fill you up for a longer period of time, so you don't go looking for extra calories when you should be reducing them, trying to lose weight. So we would always start with maybe 30, 40 grams of a protein-rich food. And then we build the meal around high fiber, different colors, plant-based, or nuts, seeds, avocados, and so forth on the fat side. So it becomes very easy and very usable.
Great. Okay, cool. So it's good to know that's really applicable for people, just to start with their protein source and decide what's going to make them feel better at the end of the day and what satiates them. And then as long as it's healthy choices, go from there.
Absolutely.
Cool. And now, what about, you just said people eating 2 meals a day, Tony. You hear this thrown around a lot. You need to eat small meals a day, or you should only eat this like a certain amount of times a day, breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Have a small breakfast, have a big lunch. What's the science say on all those type of things when it comes to meal timing, meal frequency? Is there one thing you should follow, or is it what you prefer?
Well, the answer is, I'm going to sound like a true scientist here. It depends.
Okay.
It depends on your personality. It depends on your hunger levels. It depends on your lifestyle, your work, your family situation, and the outcome that you're trying to look at. So there is research that supports having lesser meal frequency, and there's research that supports having a high meal frequency throughout the day, depending on what outcome that you're looking at. For example, research that has looked at feeding protein regularly throughout the day, so essentially you're having a breakfast, a snack, a lunch, a snack, a dinner, a snack, seems to indicate when protein was included and exercise was added as the stimulus, that there might be superior adaptations for body composition, i.e. there seems to be a higher increase in muscle tissue and a greater loss of fat tissue. And that seems to be this spiking of protein every few hours has a positive effect on muscle protein synthesis. But at the same time, there might be negatives on some of the cancer growth pathways that are associated with the IGF pathway. And in other words, every time you're digesting food, you're essentially, every time you're eating food, you're essentially in the fed state. And a lot of the processes that go on clearing damaged cells and cancerous cells and so forth, they actually occur during the fasting period. So there's been a lot of research performed, an enormous amount in animals and now a growing amount in humans, that has looked at trying to reduce the meal frequency or at least have a longer fasting period where the body can clear out these damaged senescent cells and replace them with healthy cells. Look, there's research on glucose. That is, if you have just one or two big meals a day, it tends to skyrocket your blood sugar levels after that meal. When you have smaller meals, it tends to have a more blunted response on glucose. So, Tyson, it's not a straightforward question to answer, but I would try and make a decision for you or your clients that is based on longevity and the best for the health while protecting skeletal muscle. If we adopt that kind of an approach, then I think the totality of research would suggest as long as you've got a weight training stimulus regularly throughout the week and that one or two meals in the day is designed around protein to support your skeletal muscle, and then the rest of the time is really spent in that post-absorption state, in other words, the fasting state, you're really getting the best of the both worlds of the body clearing house with the prolonged fasting, but also with the big hits of protein and your resistance training to drive up muscle growth and anabolism and not have such a profound effect on blood sugar levels. So I think if you look at the totality of that research, it would suggest time-restricted feeding, 2 or so meals in the day, trying to eat earlier in the day so that the body can fast overnight, and including protein in those meals at a larger amount possibly, and weight train several days in the week. I think where we are now in 2017, I think that is doing the justice to what we know from the science.
Okay, so just to reiterate that, to make sure I'm getting the right idea and so everyone else listening gets the right idea, you're saying that we should optimally, the best thing for us would be to do is keep our protein high, which means having 30 to 40 grams of protein at every single meal, eating 2 to 3 times a day, spreading out those meals and not eating at night. You're saying more eating during the day, and then making sure that we're doing resistance training a couple of times a week so that way we're contracting muscle and it's managing our blood glucose levels. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not so much eating at night, but trying to consume the vast majority of your calories earlier in the day. And that recommendation is now based on the growing literature that is looking at not so much what we eat, but the timing of our meals in relation to what's called the circadian biology of our digestive organs. So you're familiar with, and I think most people are familiar, that our brain and our bodies, by and large, are ruled by this 24-hour sleep-wake cycle. But it appears that our digestive organs don't run on this 24-hour light-wake cycle, but rather on patterns of eating when we eat, and in accordance with one of the hormones that puts us to sleep, which is melatonin. And it looks like that when our body is trying to wind down for sleep, i.e. at the night when the sun is setting and it's becoming darker, our body is starting to ramp up the signals that tell us it's to go to sleep. And research is now indicating that these hormones that are indicating that sleep is imminent also interfere with fuel partitioning from what we're digesting at night. And the more susceptible to this are people who have insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. They would be well advised to eat earlier in the day and include carbohydrates either around exercise or for the first meal in the day when they're most susceptible to storing that carbohydrate in their liver and in their muscle. So they're more insulin sensitive, in other words. It might not be as important for people who are insulin sensitive and very regularly active, but the totality of research, again, when you're trying to look across the literature, would indicate that we should consume the bulk of our calories earlier in the day, and when it's late in the evening, we should be fasting and sleeping.
Okay. And applying that practically, when you say we should be eating less towards the end of the day, lowering our calories, how long would you recommend going from our last meal until our first meal?
Well, a minimum of 12 hours.
Okay.
The research is plentiful in animal models and is now growing quite considerably with several labs looking at this new concept of time-restricted feeding in humans. You get benefits at a true 12-hour fast where nothing other than water was consumed, and we've got literature in breast cancer that seems to lower blood sugar levels and insulin levels and breast cancer survival from those people who have successfully treated cancer. The research in the mouse study seems to indicate that 14 or 15 hours of fasting might confer additive benefits that have to do with the muscle's mitochondria and the muscle's power capacity, the myofibrils. Because in animal studies which have looked at mouse exercising, have shown endurance benefits and strength benefits when they had a restriction in calories consumed, or that fasting period of around that 14 to 15 hours. I would start a client at 12 and, if possible, try to look to the 14 to 15 hour period. Research, at least in the mouse model, also suggests that 5 days of the week you'll get most of your benefits. So if that corresponds to Sunday night through to Friday night, and then or Thursday night, and then you're a bit looser with that on the Friday, Saturday, and Saturday, Sunday, then you're still getting considerable benefit.
Okay, cool. So starting off with a minimum of 12 hours and then working your way up from there.
Absolutely. And I think where most people think, well, I could do that with food, that's no problem, but I must have my coffee, and that is I finish dinner at 8, but I have to have my coffee at 6. It means that they're actually in the fed state for much less than that 12-hour period. And that may be long-term a bit of a metabolic disaster, or at least affect organs and metabolism and health parameters negatively. And it might be then avoid to have your first coffee. Best advice to avoid having coffee until, if you finish at 8, have your first coffee at 8 in the morning.
Okay. So either consume the coffee later on in the morning or just stop eating a little bit earlier.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great. And that's actually what I've been doing myself. I try and do about 14 hours. So my last meal is at 5:30 in the afternoon. That way, when you guys wake up in the morning, if you do want to consume coffee, if you've stopped eating at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, then 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, that's been 12 hours. That's right?
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. Great. So, Tony, pretty much we've covered off that there is no right type of diet. There's no one diet that's going to beat anybody else. It's going to be what's going to work best for ourselves and our situation, and what keeps us highly satiated during the day and doesn't make us overconsume calories. We've also talked about making sure that no matter what diet you're on, you have to be in a calorie deficit in order to lose weight. We should be eating 30 to 40 grams of protein with every single meal, and it doesn't actually matter how many meals we're eating during the day, as long as like you said, as long as at the end of the day it works for us. And we should also be consuming most of our calories during the day or around our workout time, and then stopping eating at night so much and reducing the coffee, reducing everything, and trying to fast for 12 hours. Have I pretty much covered everything we've gone over today?
Yeah, that sounds right. The dosing of protein, or how much should you eat per meal, is essentially related to two things, and that is how much do you weigh, and are you trying to be in caloric deficit to lose weight? So in other words, if you have lesser protein, but you're just eating more calories because you're bulking up to gain muscle, well, that's a very different question to trying to reduce your calories to lose weight and protect your skeletal muscle. So that dose at least needs to be 1.2 grams per kilogram of body mass, and probably higher, around that 1.6 mark, if you're trying to lose body fat and maintain your muscle tissue. If you're trying to gain muscle and you're eating a lot of calories in your weight training, it probably isn't as important because you become pretty protein sensitive or anabolically sensitive. So that number that we try and give is around 1.6 to 2 grams when you're trying to lose weight. And that, again, can be divided into half. So roughly 30, 40, maybe even 50 grams of protein if it was just a breakfast and a dinner, or a lunch and a dinner, and much easier to control if it was 3 smaller meals, and that could be 30, 30, 30, something like that.
Awesome. And so just going back over that, just so you guys, just think about that one again, guys. When it comes to the amount of protein you want to consume, Tony said a minimum of 1.2, but you always want to try. I would suggest just saying the upper limit too, because it helps the satiety, and you actually know you're hitting your numbers too, because there's always a little bit of margin for error when it comes to how much protein you're consuming when you're also tracking it. So like Tony said, stick to the 1.6, go to the 2-point mark if you want. There's obviously no health detriments that have been proven if they stay at that 2-point mark. Is that right, Tony?
No, that wouldn't be considered excessive whatsoever. And research has gone into the 3 gram plus and have looked at kidney function and so forth. And there is an upper limit. Ultimately, you have to eat something. But protein doesn't have a storage site in the body, unlike carbohydrate and fat. You'll store carbohydrate in your muscle and in your liver, and you store fat in fat cells. But protein doesn't have a storage site that's readily available. So it's pretty easily, once you consume excessive protein, your body has a very quick way of stripping it down, getting rid of the nitrogen, getting rid of the urea in your urine, and just metabolizing the protein like it was a carbohydrate because of its carbon bond. So we know that that pathway happens. And that, to me, if that is happening, means that that's wasted, and you could be consuming calories that could be feeding your gut flora or acting as fiber or something else that's quite delicious. So that's why I wouldn't recommend going too much above the 2 grams per kilogram, because to my mind, you've only got a limited caloric budget in weight loss. I wouldn't be spending it on more protein. I'd be spending it on other healthful foods like fiber.
Excellent. Well, Tony, I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your knowledge and kind of busting some of the nutrition myths that are out there. I would love to get you back on next time to maybe talk about some training, so that way we can, find out what type of training we should be doing and what you would recommend, what the science has proven at the moment. So we'll have to keep that for a future episode. But thank you once again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Tyson, thanks for having me.
No worries. Guys, that is another episode done and dusted. Go and listen to this one again. And remember, at the end of the day, there is no one perfect diet that's going to fit everybody. You've got to try and test to see what's going to work for you. And also, do some blood tests before and afterhand to get the information. You might be feeling good, but if your bloods aren't telling you the best, well, then you might need to change your approach too. So guys, have a great Tuesday afternoon, and I will speak to you next time. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. I really appreciate it. Before you go, can you please do me a massive favor and share this podcast with one friend or family member who you think would benefit from listening? All you have to do is open up your podcast app, click on those 3 dots next to the episode and click on share episode. Then you can text or email it to that friend or family member and tell them to check it out. Also, if you guys want to connect with me, I am on all social media platforms, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you want to find me, it's at TysonBPT. TysonBPT. Also, if you guys like the podcast, please go to iTunes and leave me a rating. This helps me get up the rankings, and it also helps other people find me so I can help them improve their health and fitness. Once again, thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.